1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Royal Blue Podcast Soundcheck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hello and welcome to the Royal Blue Podcast. It's Tuesday, we are live, and I am your host, Ian Croll. Joining me in the Royal Blue studio today to talk all things Everton, to talk all things Everton Accounts. We've got Joe Thomas. Joe, all good? How are things?
Yeah, very good. Cheers. It looks like I'm busy tweeting. I'm just tweeting a link to this. So I am working.
You're not being rude. You're actually busy doing work. We couldn't get you on the pod yesterday because obviously Everton Accounts were released and you were busy writing a couple of articles on that. So we've decided to do a bit of a bonus show, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. So, yeah, all good. We've also got Dave Powell, the Reach PLC's business of football writer. We pulled out the big guns. That's what we've done. You all right, Dave? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. Busy 24 hours.
Good. Okay, well, as mentioned, today's agenda, the show wasn't planned, so Everton Accounts were released yesterday, so we thought we'd do a bit of a Royal Blue bonus show. So we're going to look at the financial figures from Everton for the last 12 months, and I'm sure we'll probably finish off talking about some Merseyside Derby talk as well. As always, give us a thumbs up and drop us a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Your support, as always, is greatly appreciated. As mentioned, we are live, so get your comments in, get your questions in. Any good ones, I'll put them to the lads. So Everton have announced losses of £53.2 million in the latest club accounts. The period covers the 12 months leading to July 2024 and represents an improvement on an £89.1 million loss reported in the previous year. So, Joe, we'll come to you first. Obviously, maybe on the surface it doesn't look fantastic, but what are your initial thoughts? Because things, going in the right direction compared to previous years.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, to be honest, because it's a really intriguing thing to try and analyse, because what it does is it offers us almost like a glimpse of a moment in time that's now passed. So, when you're looking at stars in the night sky, and everyone always tells you the light that you're looking at
wow, we're getting
is years and years, thousands of years old, etc.
So early this year.
That's basically, you basically look at the light from the past by the time it's got to you. That's basically what looking at these accounts are. Because what these accounts are is they are the 12 months leading up to the beginning of July last year. Yeah. So what they represent the last full 12 months of Fayed Mashiri's reign in terms of how the financial accounts work. And what you see is more of the same than what we've come to expect. You see a club that is essentially unable to live within its means, which is battling for survival, which is dealing with heavy debt loads and massive wage to turnover ratios and debt going up, trying to struggle to build a new stadium while maintain a squad that can compete in the Premier League. So you see all those themes that we have come to expect. And I think in fairness, what you do see is for all the difficulties that those at the club are dealing with over this 12-month period, they do kind of make inroads into what they're doing. Like there is a positive trajectory there, even before we get to what we know happened over Christmas with the takeover. So I do think that there are positive signs that date back longer than the Friedkin Group's takeover, which completed in December. But that takeover is the big thing. These accounts represent the 12 months that ended last summer, and therefore the numbers essentially end 6 months before the Friedkins come in. But throughout the report, you have the reference to the Friedkin Group takeover and the work that they've done, which has essentially come in and, realign the club and put it on a much more stable footing. So you look back at a year of Mashiri where things weren't great. Well, things were bad, getting slightly better, but still unsustainable. But then you also have this glimpse of the White Knight coming in TFG and basically solving a lot of the problems and putting the club in a position laying the foundations for a much brighter future, which I'm sure Dave will be able to explain to us a lot about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Dave, obviously the previous 3-year cycle starting from 2019 was losses of 112 million, 2020 was 140 million, 2021 was 120 million. It's obviously painting a different picture, but what picture does it paint for you?
Largely what Joe said. So I mean, you're looking at that moment in time, which is no longer relevant. We're almost at the end of the 2024-25 financial year, but really it's not until beginning of 2027 when the 2025-26 accounts are going to be published that we're really going to see what Everton looks like moving forward, because that's when you'll have a full season of matchday revenue from Bramley-Moore, the new stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock, and a full kind of hit of the stadium refinancing and everything will be different then. But yeah, it's from a PSR point of view, we already knew that they were going to be compliant in January because everyone was, even Chelsea for that phenomenal way they were able to sell the women's team to themselves for £200 million. But that basically we're still going to have PSR for longer than we thought. I think most clubs thought the plan was going to be that this would be the year that it ends this season, but it would still be, you'd still be punished into next season for any kind of misdemeanors. So they've now extended it a season, and that's meaningful and impactful for Everton. So that what was it for 2021? 121 million. So that now drops off that cycle into the next 3-year cycle. So Everton won't have too many issues in terms of PSR compliance moving forward. However, a lot of the things there is a lot of good work been done to try and stem some of the kind of bleeding that had been happening across the business. So kind of amortization costs are lower than they were, which is, when you sign a player, their transfer fee is amortized over the length of a contract, 5 years. That's how it's accounted for. But that happens when you don't sign as many players. They have moved to kind of reduce the wage bill, and obviously since the Friedkins have taken over, they've kind of addressed the stadium debt. But there's so much work to be done. I mean, the biggest thing they could have done, the Friedkins, was bring in a manager who's secure survival for this season, because going into Bramley-Moore Dock, the new stadium next season with championship football would have been absolutely horrific and kind of missed a golden opportunity. But yeah, we're just looking at a moment in time which has now passed, and they're going to be PSR compliant for the next cycle, I'm sure of it, because nothing has really changed massively in this current financial year to suggest otherwise anyway. They're able to cash flow the business better, so the cash balance at hand is increased from what it was. And that was, so you look back 12 months or so when we were coming on this pod and talking about how 777 partners were basically just keeping the lights on through these these loans for working capital. That there's no longer any of that issue at play. So I think it's just a weird one. This very much feels like drawing a line in the sand almost from the end of the Managerial era, which, while obviously it's been pretty tumultuous, and if you were rating it as homework, then it's probably pretty much like an F. But he only saves from a U, I suppose, by the fact that the stadium has actually been completed as was planned. But yeah, no, I think it's the really interesting set of accounts. I don't think there's been a football club I can think of that has changed so massively from one set of accounts to what we'll probably see in the next 18 months or so. Kind of organically as well, because you can't spend like Mashiri did when he came in. The Friedkins can't, but they've managed to pull out other levers. So the kind of the stadium refinancing. They're going to move into a new stadium. They're going to have revenue streams which they've never been able to have before. From commercial opportunities to stadium naming rights to other commercial income, such concerts, other sporting events, etc. So I think look at them as this is what it was, not what it will be.
I mean, Joe, we'll come on to PSR because I know a lot of the fans are going to be interested and maybe concerned how much Everton are going to be able to spend in the summer. But in terms of since the Friedkins have come in, you wrote a couple of pieces on the Liverpool Echo website, and you referenced, the Friedkins coming in and the fight back. Obviously, prior to that, I think it was bleak. I don't think anyone could deny that. I think, the club might maybe not want to admit how bleak it was, but obviously, I think we can forget all about that because the Friedkins have come in. What, like, from your point of view, from what you've seen, what you've spoke to people from in the club or whatever, what are the things that they've done to help improve over the last, couple of months since they've come in?
Yeah, we're just going back to where we were 12 months ago, that there were times when the club was living month by month. It was waiting desperately for the latest 777 injection of cash to come through to keep the lights on, essentially, to keep the bills. There were times when they were looking to pull commercial deals out at very, very short notice just to try and keep everything ticking over. And to their credit, whilst we rightly give the club a lot of criticism for ending up in that position in the first place, a substantial amount of hard work under incredible pressure has been done at that club in recent years to just try and keep things going to the point whereby someone like the Friedkins actually come in and see an opportunity in Everton and want to put money into it. So, there are people that do deserve credit for that. I think when you look at where we were 12 months ago, there was a way, although this was never quite real debt, you can make an argument to say Everton were about £1 billion in debt. They owed £450 million in shareholder loans to Farhad Mashiri. You had the debt that they already had. You had the money that they owed 777, the money that they owed other lenders like Rights and Media Funding and things like that. All these different packages all over the place. And not only were they hugely in debt, but the cost to service that debt was huge because these weren't high street banks. Mashiri wasn't at a point where he could just go to your reputable lenders around the world and get favourable interest rates because Everton's financial outlook was so bad. So they're paying through the roof every month millions and millions of pounds in interest. The two big things that the Friedkins have done since coming in, one is they've got rid of the shareholder loan to Farhad Mashiri, something they had to do anyway. So that £450 million that Mashiri was technically owed has now gone. It's been converted into equity. That doesn't mean to say that they paid £450 million to Farhad Mashiri. The terms of the sale really are still between them and him, but it would have been nowhere near that much money. Absolutely certain. But that was a significant thing for not just the balance sheet, but also for PSR, because we were moving to a situation whereby from the middle of January this year, clubs that had interest-free loans from their shareholders, well, from a PSR perspective, the Premier League was going to work out what the market rate of interest would be and add that to their packages. So, Everton would have seen another couple of £1 million each year added on to their PSR bill, which would have made it harder to be compliant. The other big thing that TFG have done is all those debt packages that they had with all these different operators, they basically consolidated them. They've paid off all the different lenders that they didn't want to be dealing with anymore. They've consolidated the debt in kind of a lump sum, and they've through JP Morgan Chase, they've managed to restructure it, refinance it. So all of a sudden, Everton, rather than having to kind of go off the books to try and find anybody that will lend them money at any rate, now they've got it with reputable banks, reputable lenders at sensible interest rates. It's saving them millions of pounds. So although the debt is high and the debt rose by about well over £200 million, about £567 million this year. Obviously, what you do have is you do now have a completed stadium. You do have a squad that has kept Everton, will keep Everton in the Premier League this season, and you are paying far, far less to service that debt as well, which is they are all big positives.
Just Jack Potter's pointed out, almost every club is in debt, but I think importantly to what you've just said there, it's manageable.
Now it's debt on Everton's terms, as opposed to previously where it was, as I say, it was like going to a loan shark. And you don't know when people are going to call it in. They can charge whatever they want because you're just desperate for that money to keep the lights on. Now it's all reputable people. The reputation of the Friedkin Group and their international business empire has allowed them to have conversations with leading banks around the world, and there was actually competition for Everton's debt because banks see this as a safe bet. Yeah. So they're happy to take the payback over a longer period because they know they're going to get those instalments. So they make money off the interest, obviously.
You'd have thought being in debt would be a good thing.
Well, I mean, it's owing debt by the banks is a good thing for them. It's not a good thing for Everton, but
there is good debt and bad debt.
We've spoken about this in the past.
And it's the world runs on credit. So if you look at Spurs, that's what £800 million worth of debt. It's good debt, done at a cheap level interest rate. They managed to complete a world-class stadium, which will allow that cash flows the business every single year. So yeah, there's good debt and bad debt. When you have interest rates of 18%, as high as 18% on some of what the debt they had, and you've got such messy debt structure. That's bad debt because there is no strategy towards it. It's basically just debt to keep the lights on. So they've effectively gone from kind of lending money off Wonga to being able to go to Goldman Sachs, and that's the way it works, So they've tackled a problem. So now and they've managed to turn that debt. Debt is a word which spooks a lot of people, but in reality, as long as you can service that debt and you've managed to do something with the borrowing that creates kind of value to the business, which they have done, then they're absolutely fine.
I mean, 18% is insane. I'm worried about my mortgage fixed term of 4% coming up. Do you know what I mean? So
that was some of the figures bandied around, but the more shorter term. I think before that you were looking at kind of figures of 8 and 9%. But when you think about it, what's the base rate at the Bank of England at the moment? It's just under 5%, I think. So. And that is high. I mean, because we're all struggling to seeing our mortgages go up. But that, when we're ever going to go borrowing, when you consider 2018, 19 before the pandemic, interest rates were kind of 1.5% or so. So yeah, it's a massive change. But but also in terms of interest on some of the debt. I mean, there will be a bigger cost to bear moving forward because a lot of that interest was capitalised. So that's where you kind of roll up the interest and add it to the value of the debt itself. Some of it was expense this year, and moving forward, they'll start to expense more of that. It will cost more to run the stadium. So these are kind of unseen expenses which will be added. So yes, while they've saved lots and lots of money on interest payments, they've still got to kind of expense that interest over a period of time when they have been capitalising it. So, and you're also going to have far higher costs, administrative costs and running costs to the club because the stadium's bigger. There's more people going to be required to do more jobs, but it will earn them more money in the longer term, and that ultimately means that they will be kind of net positive.
I mean, just sticking with you, Dave, you touched on commercial opportunities. With Bramley Moore now, the benefits, as a positive, they're already being felt with the announcement of a rugby league match between Australia and England, the Ashes series. So obviously stuff like that is obviously going to help on the books, on the accounts for the forthcoming year. I mean, how quick do you think Everton can get this all turned around for like concerts? We know, Liverpool across the park, they do multiple concerts each summer. I mean, that's all beneficial to Everton as well in the future.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a golden opportunity to create something which not all clubs have. So they've managed to do this. Interest rates aren't going down meaningfully anytime soon. So you look at Manchester United's plan for this $2 billion build for Old Trafford. That's going to be hugely expensive, and that's going to have to be done through a mixture of kind of going to banks, private equity, and maybe giving away parts of the business. So Everton are already up and running now, so they've managed to resolve some of the kind of debt issues around it. But it's a location which, yes, I know we can talk about some of the issues around. It's kind of for another day that around the logistics of maybe getting to the ground.
Don't get us started, Dave. Don't get us started on the stadium logistics.
Something that we have covered extensively.
But that is something which. But there are ways and means of addressing that, I'm sure, and I'm imagine now the Friedkins have kind of got their hands on the wheel. They'll be looking at ways to try and make that a reality, whereby it's easier access. But you've got a stadium there it looks an iconic stadium right next to the waterfront. And they've got the plaza, they've got hospitality, they've got all the retail and the food outlets and whatnot. That will be a compelling venue for artists who want to perform in the city. So they've got the M&S Bank Arena, they've got Anfield as well, where concerts are, but there is a huge clamour for big artists, and they like I'm probably going off tangent here, but for instance, someone like Beyonce wanted to do more dates at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium this summer, so she's doing a 6-night run because of the fact the stadium's closer to the pitch, the acoustics are better, rather than kind of big cavernous arena tours. So I think Everton, the stadium was built for that kind of atmosphere, to create it for football matches, yes, but it also will be beneficial to creating an atmosphere, whether it's for other sporting events or whether it's for concerts or whatever. So I think that they'll be able to monetize that significantly. So clubs, Liverpool made, I think for the 3 Taylor Swift concerts last summer, and the Pink concerts that they did, that's probably looking at kind of 11, 12 million additional revenue, and that's revenue for when there's no match days. You think about how limited they were at Goodison Park, iconic venue, yes, but so limited in what they could do with the space around it, in terms of ancillary development, and also how they could monetize what's around them. So this is the way, so if you go to the US and you go to some of these stadiums, the experience of the whole thing, whether it's the concourses, into the stadium, everything is kind of an attack on the senses almost. But there's so many opportunities which can be monetized, which we don't do traditionally well in the UK anyway. But now with US ownership, they will be looking at how to bring elements of that across. But also, it's probably important to note that the Friedkins don't have any experience in terms of North American sports ownership. They're more adept at running football clubs because they own AS Roma. So, but they are now looking into that market. So I wonder whether they'll try and align themselves with. There was some talk of them looking at the Celtics, which they were, and they're also looking at the potential franchise, ice hockey franchise in Houston. So with them looking at this, I wonder whether they'll try and look at maybe means to cross over. So the NHL series does a global tour. They go on tour. They bring money in through that type of thing. So maybe we'll see that type of thing in the future. But I think this will be a venue which is literally 24/7, 365. So, and that for Everton is something that they've never been able to do before, and I think it'll be hugely meaningful.
Who's the first artist you want to see at Bramley-Moore, Joe? Who would you go and see?
Paul McCartney.
Well, I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. Okay. Let's just take us back to the points.
Me in that decision.
Who would yours be?
Hey, I don't know.
Wu-Tang.
They're only doing one at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, go for that. Wu-Tang Clan. Yeah, I'm not going to New York to watch him. So
I'd say Eminem maybe or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it might be a bit more family friendly than that. I don't know how many.
Yeah, true.
Kids are gonna.
Bit of ghost face
First
there.
one, yeah. Probably be something a bit more kind of light-hearted.
I'm sure there'll be plenty on the go. Maybe Beyonce. We'll get Beyonce tickets, Joe.
Absolutely.
It's a shame DMX has carked it, otherwise it would have been there.
Wow. We'll swiftly move on then to points deduction. This was mentioned in the accounts, Joe, and I think it was something that we knew was probably going to be impacted on Everton's financial figures. So if I just read out from one of your pieces, so Everton earned a total of 16.9 million in Premier League merit payments for the club's 15th place finish last season. Obviously, if Everton had not lost the 8 points from the points deduction, they would have finished 12th. That means they would have earned 25.4 million in merit payments. So, we're down 8.5 million, I guess, in total, if you do the maths. We knew effectively this would probably, come, and effectively Everton have been punished twice a little bit from that.
Yeah, I mean, the real figure's probably bigger as well, because there's no doubt that what was going on off the pitch cast a shadow over a lot of what was going on the pitch. Finch Farm was a very difficult place to be for the middle third of last season, and Everton, whilst they would have finished 12th with those extra 8 points, I don't think it's unfair to think that they might not have gone 4 months without a Premier League victory, which is just astonishing when you think about it. If they didn't have those issues weighing heavily on the mind of everybody at the club, then it's probably reasonable to think they might have picked up 4 or 5 more points, and 4 or 5 more points would have moved them up a fair few places, and then all of a sudden there's even more millions of pounds that they're missing out on. I wrote a piece at the time of kind of this vicious cycle of which felt problematic of the way the Premier League are handling the points, the PSR cases, in the sense that it felt really frustrating that really punishment should be part of this thing. Look, Everton, they breached the regulations and they knew what the regulations were. I think everyone can accept they deserve some degree of punishment for that. But also part of it has to be an opportunity for rehabilitation, and it felt like the way in which it was handled with the punishments, it was almost designed to... most clubs are in this position because they're struggling, and what they need is a bit of an opportunity, a route out to kind of a more sustainable future. Yet by the way in which the Premier League went so harsh and the manner in which they went, it has real impacts elsewhere in the business, like these millions of pounds that Everton are going to miss out on, which are £1 million that they need to be more sustainable to get to a position where the PSR losses are fewer. So, that was a really frustrating thing. They were on TV more because they were in a relegation fight, so they took in more money there. But there's also, note in the accounts there's about £10 million of exceptional costs, some of which were for the legal expenses to fight those cases against the Premier League. Not all of that would have been that. So, it's just another area where you can see how it wasn't just points that caused Everton to suffer. We spoke long and hard about punishments and severity and the integrity of the Premier League and, why PSR probably matters, but how it's a bit of a blunt instrument, I think, for some of what they're doing, or certainly with the way and the inconsistency of they approached the prosecutions once they got there, it wasn't really ideal. But Everton lost out on about £8.5 million. And I say in reality it was probably more because of those points deductions.
Put that in context. That's half a season's matchday revenue at Goodison Park, or the likely kind of 70% of the value of the main front of shirts ones. So these aren't insignificant.
Substantial,
sums,
isn't it?
They are significant. And I think because we are so used to seeing huge transfer fees, and we think that's just those are the big numbers, and everything else is just kind of small potatoes. We forget that these numbers are very real and very meaningful. So, I think they're right to be agreed, but also I think we need to keep an eye on the Burnley case, which is going to rumble on this summer, because their argument is they missed out on kind of Everton's punishment being the following year that resulted in their relegation. But the flip side of that is that should Burnley have their case upheld with that opens the door up to someone like Leeds United for saying, well, in that case we missed out on maybe £2.5 million worth of merit payments ourselves. So
just goes on and
you
on.
wonder where that you kind of close the door on this. So the hope would be that kind of some common sense would prevail this summer, I think.
If I can just ask you about the wages, Dave, from Everton and the wage to turnover ratio. So from 2022 to 2023, it was 89%. And from the previous year, the last 12 months, it's dropped down to 81%. So obviously a lot of the clubs in the league were kind of working towards wage to turnover ratio, because that's what we thought it was going to be. We know now that PSR is staying, but in terms of obviously Everton looking to bring wages down and keeping, in the restrictions of the new format that's going to be coming in.
I think because they know that's the way the direction of travel is, that the clubs across the Premier League are going to look to drive down their wages to turnover ratio, but also be more mindful of what they do in the transfer market, because it's likely that we're going to see kind of wages to turnover and kind of amortization costs brought into that as well. So wages and amortization costs against turnover to give you kind of a ratio. So I think it's just common sense. I think we've spoken about this in the past. I think the era of excess almost it's not come to a halt, because it's still very kind of there's aggressive spend. But if you look at the way clubs spend in the transfer market now and the approach of everyone's strategy trying to find cheaper talent, no one wants to spend high wages anymore. No one wants onerous contracts. So you only have to look at the difficulties Manchester United have in trying to alight themselves of Marcus Rashford, and Anthony, and players like that who they handed out huge contracts to. These are I think the way the Premier League will go is that we'll start to see wages come down, but also because I think a lot of clubs can probably see the iceberg in terms of they can no longer rely on broadcast rights just going up annually. It's kind of anti-Darwinian to think everything goes up forever. Yeah. They don't. So domestic rights are already starting to plateau in terms of on a per game basis, even though the value of the deal is 6.7 billion over 4 years. That's over 4 years. And the old deal for 5 billion was over 3 years and had 200 games instead of the 270. So if you kind of look at on a per game basis, the value of each game is down. So will the domestic rights go up continually? No, I don't think so. International rights might have a little bit longer to go. So clubs now are starting to think about how do we find ways to raise revenue so we can pay big wages and make sure that we're not having this kind of huge, if you're spending 80% of your wages, or nearly 90% as they were, on 8 of your turnover on wages, that's a kind of unsustainable business model. But football doesn't operate in the normal realm of business. So, but I think clubs are going to start to try and find ways and means. And there's no surprise that there is kind of an arms race for stadiums happening at the moment. Everyone's trying to build new stadiums or redevelop stadiums at the moment. Everton have done theirs, so they can see the potential for growth. But I don't think that's going to mean they're going to pay any more or much more in wages. I think the wage structure will largely remain the same. I think they'll cap themselves at a certain level to be sustainable. And I think a lot of clubs will do that. And that's why I think we're probably going to see players become more unionised and kind of not militant in that respect, but certainly I wonder whether we might see collective bargaining come into the Premier League at some stage, because players want that wage rise to keep on going. Of course they do, like any industry. But clubs are going to have a harder and harder time to pay the bill, especially with the uncertainty around broadcast rights. But Everton's working reducing that by 7 or 8%. To be applauded, really. And I think revenue is going to rise certainly by the end of next season. Revenue will rise considerably, which means that naturally that gap grows. But also, I think it will be. I think there should be no thinking that this is going to be a huge transfer spend in the market where wage spend is going to get high and big transfer fees. I think those days are gone. They'll engage in the market, of course, but I think they'll engage at a far more sustainable and sensible level than they ever did previously. Yeah,
it's just interesting as well, because it's another area that everyone will probably make more progress in this summer. Obviously, we know that about 15 senior players are out of contract. Obviously, that includes the loan players. But when you look at some of the wages that are likely to drop off the wage bill this summer, Mason Holgate's clearly going to go. Michael Keane is probably going to go. Abdoulaye Doucouré, we're not entirely sure about. That conversation hasn't been had. But what we do know is that the club have let the opportunity to renew his contract on the same terms. They've let that deadline lapse. So if Abdoulaye Doucouré does end up staying, it will almost certainly be because he ends up on reduced terms. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is another big earner at the club, and his future is obviously very much up for grabs as well. So what we will probably see is, on the one hand, Everton will almost get a double boost, really, because their turnover will start to increase, and their wage bill will decrease, and that gap will become bigger, which is significant, because although we're talking about PSR staying in the Premier League, the wage to turnover is something that UEFA are very much interested in, and obviously we hope to get to a point where Everton may start qualifying for UEFA competitions, at which point, obviously, the stronger that they are in some of these behind-the-scenes instruments of measurements, the better.
No, it's clear that's what the club are working towards, the wage to turnover ratio. Joe, one glaring positive omission from the last 12 months accounts is that there was no manager payoff.
Yeah, well, that's it. So.
People say that as a positive, people might see that as a negative. I don't know. It's not for me to say. However, one of the last 12 months accounts, we did pay Frank Lampard and his team £7.1 million. So that is obviously a substantial amount. But again, last 12 months, no manager payoff. I guess with Dyche gone now, would that maybe push forward to the next?
Yeah, so the 12 months that we're currently in will include the payoff for Dyche's staff. Yeah. The other thing that we had with the same year as Frank Lampard's departure, we had the boardroom departures as well, so added another £3 or £4 million, I think, to that, which obviously wasn't part of the latest set of accounts that have come out. So Dyche's money will be in the accounts that we see next summer. So, the accounts that end. No, it's just so confused. Ending this summer, and we will see in about 12 months' time. Yeah. Basically, the next conversation that we have on accounts will be about how much Dyche got paid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Joe, I want to come on to you in a sec about PSR and what that means for summer recruitment. But Dave, just first off, why? PSR was meant to be on its way out after this season, and obviously, again, as we've just discussed, it was moving to a squad cost ratio. Why have the Premier League or the 20 Premier League's teams voted to keep PSR for at least one more year?
I think they felt they didn't have enough to vote on effectively, because Manchester City has still got this live kind of associated party transaction case going through. which is impactful. They're also, you've got a lot of detail which could emerge from this, their own case there with the Premier League over the 115 or charges. I mean, it's more according to some. So the idea was they felt they didn't have enough clarity over certain issues to vote through kind of this change in regulation at a time when the Premier League is actively battling and with some of its member clubs and its own shareholders over elements of financial control. So yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee that PSR is not going to continue into 2026-27. It was here until at least the end of next season. I wonder now whether there might be less appetite to change it so quickly because most clubs have started to get their house in order, and we're not seeing these punishments on a kind of yearly basis.
I was going to say, does it not surprise you? Because obviously you've got other clubs, say for instance United, maybe Villa as well. Again, I don't know their accounts, but you just read stuff about United are in financial trouble if they don't do this, blah blah blah. But are you not surprised that it's not being voted out, basically?
No, I think it goes by the majority, Yeah. So the majority have managed to keep their, and Everton knew full well that they were going to be PSR compliant this year, and also into they're likely going to be into next year as well. So there was no real need for them to kind of vote against anything like that. So certainly when their squad to kind of wages ratio is still quite high, wages turnover rate is still quite high. So for them and for other clubs, it gives them more chance to address that situation ahead of time while still remaining compliant. So I just think over the next 18 months, we're probably going to see a bit more of a depressed transfer market because of that, because clubs are going to be mindful about what it actually looks like on the other side of when regulations agreed and what those controls are going to be. So, yeah, it's Manchester City are basically throwing a bit of a spanner into the works with it, and clubs feel they haven't got the ability to vote with all of the facts at hand on this. So that's basically what it is, and it's kind of better the devil you know, isn't it? So rather than rush into something where clubs are scrambling, no one knows. And if we look back at PSR anyway, the Premier League didn't even appear to know exactly what its rules and regulations were at the time. So they can't afford to go into changing the rules and not being fully aligned with all its member clubs and ultimately its shareholders over what regulation looks like. So it's not until a period where everyone is aligned and they feel that they've got something watertight that they'll push ahead with it, because the past 18 months, 2 years has kind of been rather kind of unedifying, I suppose, for the Premier League, when they've almost not been able to govern their own competition.
Yeah, no, I get it and I understand that. I just think you've described it as a depressed transfer market, or it's going to be. I feel like it's been like that anyway for the past 18 months or 2 years.
There's only the big clubs that can spend because they're the only clubs that have room because they have high revenues. And yes, they have high wages, but they can rely on those revenues more readily. So Arsenal have increased revenues by 250 million almost over the past 2 years because of Champions League football. But they're in a position there whereby now that they'll be able to do that with regularity, which they are. So the transfer market is like any financial market. It requires liquidity to work. So in order for everyone to participate, you need more spend because it's more money in everyone's pockets. But the problem you have now is that countries like Serie A, like Italy and Serie A, don't spend as much as they did. Spain don't, because Barcelona have taken themselves out of the game for the last 4 or 5 years because they're so heavily in debt. Real Madrid continue to spend, yes. But you look across La Liga, the rest of it, no one's really spending. Germany, only Bayern Munich can really spend. Dortmund don't really go down that route of spending. And France, the broadcast market is so horrific that there's only Paris Saint-Germain can spend. So outside of the Premier League, you've got about 6 or 7 teams that can only actively participate at a large level in the transfer market. And that ultimately affects the liquidity that exists in everyone else's, so there's less money in people's pockets. So the market isn't working as it once did. So, but I think that's not going to be a trend which changes anytime soon. So I don't think anyone's broadcast deals are going to go sky high. It's quite a concerning time, actually, certainly for some of the European leagues like France. I think that's in a kind of really precarious position. Premier League less so, but ultimately what this does is impact the value of the transfer market for everyone.
What it does also mean is that there's more value for the Premier League clubs that do have a bit of money to spend, isn't there? And obviously Everton, places like France, where they've got good scouting networks and whilst it's all bad news for the wider footballing world, it means that in a summer where Everton are going to have a significant rebuild, there is value there if they can get ahead of the game.
Do you not see the frustration in it from like fans of teams who can't spend?
Absolutely. Nothing. It's hard to make a case for any regulation that's come in recent years that has moved to make the kind of the competitive element of it any better, because it's already been baked in, and that's just the way it is now. It sounds really kind of defeatist to say, but yes, but I think there is the banner year that you can have, like Forest have had. The Leicester thing was kind of the way that aligned was fairy tale stuff, because they basically had the same team to pick the entire season, played the same tactics, and it just worked, But I think Forest was they have a good squad, but I think you look at Forest and think maybe that's a blueprint of how things should be. Obviously they did everything in one huge kind of fell swoop and acquired all this talent, but they managed to just about keep themselves PSR compliant. But you look at some of the players they signed, like Murillo and players like that, they are out there in the markets. I just think it's trying to find that value. The quality of players hasn't decreased,
No.
nor has the volume of good players decreased. What has changed is where to find these players, the value of them. So I can see it from a fan's point of view, certainly, because how long has it been now since Everton have actually been able to kind of participate in a way which they haven't been hamstrung by financial regulation and not hobbled themselves.
Well, we had the conversation yesterday. We were trying to figure out who Everton signed last season, and we were like, there's got to be more than this. But they were all loans or effectively free signings.
Well, the last time Everton kind of spent more fluidly was the Frank Lampard summer, Kevin Farwell's first summer, and you can kind of look at that in two ways. We'll obviously come on to this with PSR in a moment. On the one hand, it hobbled Everton for the foreseeable future. On the other hand, the players they signed are ultimately the ones that kept them in the Premier League. It's a bit like with Forest. Obviously, a lot of the Forest squad now that's having so much success were brought in that summer where they breached PSR, and obviously got the points deductions for it. And this is the tricky thing, is it's that gamble, it's that equation that clubs are trying to work out what to do. Sometimes it's almost worth. Well, it's clear that there were times to say Forest and Nansen thought it was worth taking the hit, and the problem with the Premier League is it's trying to bring in more regulation and make clubs more sustainable. Is that Forest are probably a bad example for that, because they took the hit and look where they are now.
Yeah, and they kind of willingly.
And also,
took that as
to
well.
a certain extent, Everton as well, because we can get all the ins and outs, but they spent big in that summer of Lampard. Or at least in context, they spent big in that summer of Lampard, and they stayed up. With the went down to the final whistle at the final game. So when you've got clubs that are going down saying, that PSR, they deserve to be punished for breaching PSR, because look at the material impact it had on the pitch.
But we were punished.
But that's what I mean. When you've got clubs saying that they deserve to be punished for it, you can kind of see why they are frustrated.
I think for Everton, they're one of the few Premier League clubs looking forward that don't have to do so much chasing. So I think you think about Chelsea, that's a chase, because everything is around what do we do to pay the band if we don't get Champions League football. Because it's high stakes every single season. So whereas Everton aren't because the aim of everyone is Champions League football, but in reality they're planning for survival, because that's how it has to be in the Premier League. Anyone who is outside of the top 6 or 7 clubs, first and foremost, you have to survive. It's not it's not a defeatist or pessimistic. It is basically the value of the Premier League is so great that you have to survive first and foremost. So you have everyone's chasing. Manchester United are chasing. They're at the kind of limit of what they can do. So their transfer market activity is going to change rapidly. They've got a huge wage bill which they still need to address. So a lot of clubs have got problems. And I think over the next decade, the clubs that have managed to create that room for themselves, either by will or by force. So Spurs, I think, have the ability to really kick on as a football club, because they've got such kind of gaps between what they're earning and what they're spending. You wonder whether Everton's moving to a new stadium might allow them to do that, so they can spend without having to have so much concern around, chasing their tail. So, but I think there's a few clubs that are going to, reality is going to bite for them. It's
fascinating as well, because you talk about that chase. That chase has also happened at the bottom of the league as well. So you see that gulf between, it looks like the 3 promoted sides will go back down again for the second season in a row. But you look at, I think Ipswich are quietly having a really bad season because they spent a lot of money in the summer that they're now going to have to deal with through the Championship and for the next few years. They were in competition with Everton for a lot of players, and Everton missed out on them. The likes of you obviously later, your Jaden Philogines and people like that. But they're not going to have anything to show for it because they're probably going to go down. And I think that it's really like one of the things I find quite interesting about the Premier League now is if you are run properly, which I think we're moving to a point where Everton are going to be run properly, kind of getting from that cusp of a relegation battle into those lower European places, that's actually relatively straightforward. Going from zero to hero essentially. The problem is then once you get into the European places and then your accounts become used to the European money, but that you also have to have a bigger squad to kind of deal with the fact that you're playing European football and you're having to fight off the challenge of the clubs beneath you that are trying to get into your position whilst also trying to catch up with the teams above you. That's when you kind of get that chase, and we've seen so many clubs struggle with that. But almost you would hope now with the Friedkins and with Everton staying up and with having a sensible manager in charge that the first few steps of progress will hopefully be the easiest. I don't think the hard thing for Everton is going to be turning 16th into necessarily 11th, and then 11th into then pushing up to maybe around 7th, 8th, 9th. The hard thing will then be trying to work out what on earth you do once you get to those points, what position you're in, whether you carry on, try and play catch up, whether you consolidate and how you do that because it's so competitive.
I definitely want to come on to you at PSR, but something's just come into my head. I'm sure I read somewhere, and you might not know, Dave, that clubs may be awarded a European place if their finances are all in order, or you get the best finances in the league. Is that something that you've come across?
Seen it mentioned.
Is this real?
They need to create a European competition for that, really. The Intertoto Cup or something like that.
The financial fair play cup.
Financial fair play. I mean, yes, but the carrot shouldn't really be that, because there's lots of clubs that are sustainably run. How they're going to determine that? It's just going to open up a more kind of avenues for litigation, I suppose.
A more effective route would be to take European football away from the teams that are badly run.
Yeah, I mean, it should always be it should be on a competitive scale. So if a club above has done it by being horrific set of financial accounts. But I mean, ultimately, they would have been compliant with them if otherwise. So I think it's just. I think the idea, there is. I don't think that's a solution. I think it's. I think it's one of those things that maybe Alexander Seferin says when he has to,
I'm sure it was being pushed
fill a void
by Levy. I'm sure he was pushing it.
I bet he was.
Yeah, well,
yeah, I know.
That's the other thing. It isn't going to be a panacea for Everton because it'll take a long time for Everton to be able to compete with the likes of Spurs and maybe Brighton and others on that front.
And also some clubs just won't be able to do that.
And they'll be in Europe anyway, probably through the league position, so it'll become irrelevant.
Yeah, just.
You said no curveballs, Ian.
Sorry,
that was
a curveball. That wasn't on the agenda.
That was a bit of a sneaky one.
Real curveball.
I do apologise. I got to apologise as well. I pressed the button about 5 minutes ago, and a graphic came up on the screen. So anyone watching
What was it?
What was it?
It was just an Everton Royal Blue graphic.
Oh, right.
So we're safe. Just in case anyone was interrupted by that.
Come off your camera roll.
I do apologise, but we're back on track. Nothing was missed. Kevin Kraft says some great stuff being discussed here.
Thank you,
Joe. So, I mean, the big question is, at the end of the day now, with PSR sticking around for at least one more year, with the accounts being released, what does this mean for Everton in terms of spending in the summer?
Yeah, it is the big question. And I think it's positive, to be honest, for Everton. I think that it's going to be a summer of two windows, essentially. You have the build up to June 30th, 1st of July, which will be the end of this summer's accounts, and then you have what comes after it. Now, with this summer's accounts, so basically everything Everton do up to July the 1st, I think it's still going to be tight. So you don't expect any big moves early on in the summer transfer market, but similarly, I don't think that there's going to be a need for a big sale like a Jared Brownflake or something like that to make Everton PSR compliant. It is trying to kind of read the tea leaves a little bit because you don't get the PSR numbers within these, and PSR doesn't reflect the full accounts because there are the losses that they've got. There are allowable deductions from that, but essentially, Everton went into this cycle or this accounts that have come out with a wriggle room of about £35 million they could lose from a PSR perspective and still be compliant. We know that they fell underneath that because they were PSR compliant, but we also know that it was close because it did require, there were nerves at the club at the end of the season that basically meant that they had to sell before the end of the financial window. There was a concern that might have been a Jared Branthwaite, and I think that's why you see Man United put those cheeky bids in. But I think, to his credit, Kevin Fowler managed to come up with an alternative solution, and that's where we saw the sales of Ben Godfrey and Lewis Dobbin to take Everton under that threshold. So Everton were pushing it close. What I don't know is whether those sales took Everton from over the limit to just under the limit of £105 million, or whether it was, we're going to be ultra cautious. We got it wrong the last few years, and we'll just do it just to make case. The financial year that we're in currently is tight. The big problem that Everton have on their books from a PSR perspective is every 3 years, and it's that summer under Lampard and Falwell, where they racked up, effectively from a PSR perspective, about a bill of about £65 million. So the wriggle room for Everton this year is that £65 million, plus whatever they lost from a PSR perspective last year, whatever's left over is the wriggle room. That's probably going to be quite tight. So yeah, they might need to do a little bit of chicanery in the next few months, but I don't think there's any real concern at the club that they're going to have to move mountains to do that. I think there's I think the Friedkins, obviously, they've had a lot of foresight of the books before they take on, so they knew what they were walking into from a PSR perspective. I think that they're relatively comfortable with it, and of course, the 12 months that we're currently in include the sale of Amadou Onana, which was a significant one as well. So work has already been done there to kind of mitigate against the losses, because there will be losses. Everton aren't going to go from £50 million worth of losses to being in the clear. So I think it's a very complicated way of saying that. Look, probably still a bit of caution. There are advantages to sales if Everton can get them on terms that they like before the end of June. But I don't think there's any kind of real need to panic at the end of this season. Once we hit into July, everything changes, because that big summer of the £65 million of PSR losses, that drops off. Mm-hmm. So for Everton to be PSR compliant for this year, the most they can lose is about £40 million over the course of the year we're in now and the year that we know they're compliant just for. Obviously, they'll have a window of at least £65 million for the next 12 months, and that will improve when you look at things like the wage bill's going to come down. They're going to move into the new stadium, so revenue's going to go up exponentially. New commercial deals will come onto the market. So look, I don't think that Everton are going to spend massive in the sum in terms of what we all know is massive for all the reasons that Dave's just said. I think we're in a new market. I think the Friedkin Group are cautious, and I think that the plan will be to build forward and build sustainably. But I think Everton will have money to spend from July the 1st onwards for that rebuild. They will have wriggle room from a PSR perspective. They will have the opportunity to do some deals. Obviously, I think a lot of them they'll probably try and pick up on frees. They've got a lot of squad building to do. And I don't think they'll necessarily, again, for the reasons that Dave's explained, be going in and saying, well, you're a free, so we're going to pay you massive wages to convince you to come over here. Sustainability and caution will still be watchwords going forward. But there is room for Everton to spend in the summer, providing they can just get through to end of June, maybe do a little bit of, as I say, business before then, just to kind of get over the line. And then, from July the 1st, a whole new world opens up to them. What I would also caveat that with, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have a big sale if the opportunity came along. Yeah. And I think people need to kind of remember that, because they will want to be pragmatic. And I think the Friedkins know this, I think Moyes knows this. I've read a comment somewhere saying somewhere we're Everton in trouble because it feels like the Royal Blue podcast are preparing us all for a Branthwaite sale this summer. That's not my ambition.
Who said that?
I read it just in somewhere. But because we had this conversation last week when there were links to Branthwaite to elsewhere. Yeah. I think that pragmatism will still be a key to the approach. And the reality is, if someone comes in with a massive bid for a player, well, the value of that bid to the club and what it can do to your finances, and what it can do exponentially from a PSR perspective, is massive. It gives you so much more wriggle room to kind of then explore deals to rebuild the club. So I don't think Everton would necessarily turn their nose up at big money just for the sake of big money, just because they're in a better financial position. But they are no doubt in a much stronger financial position. So I think there's there might be a little bit of work to do before the end of June. I don't think it's going to be massive. I don't think anybody's too concerned about it. And from July the 1st onwards, there's a lot more opportunity for Everton to spend if they want to spend.
They have leverage now as well. I mean, they haven't previously. Everyone thought, knew full well if they go to Everton. Like you look at Manchester United with the bids for Branthwaite, they, it's kind of like vultures hovering over a kind of a carcass or something, isn't it? Trying to pick off what they can. It's now there is no. They have leverage. There is no requirement for them to sell. But as you say, if it's a big sale and they could kind of reinvest those funds in a meaningful way into the actual team and maybe address 3 or 4 issues as opposed to just replacing the one, then that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I think that what it comes down to me is the club are in control of the decision of whether to sell the assets or not.
They haven't been for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I think that was a very long-winded way of saying.
I tell you, I'm gonna
tight until July, until June the 30th. Not more freedom after July the 1st. Yeah, just thanks, Ian.
I'm going to throw.
You know what? I spent 24 hours trying to figure out how I would answer that question when you asked it, and I still messed it up.
I am very good at summing things up in short amount of words. I'm going to throw a little grenade in that wasn't part of the agenda. It's only
one.
It's only a little one, right? So you use the word chicanery, which I love, by the way.
Great word.
I wanted to stop you and say I just love that word, but I love it.
Goosebumps when you said it.
I was going to use creativity, but it's nothing to what you just said.
No.
The club are going to have to use chicanery, creativity, I think, is what we're all like getting at in the summer to sign these players. Kevin Thelwell has obviously not going to be at the club come the end of the season. He has probably been the main person who's, being creative and trying to sign these players over the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying we should have done this, but was it maybe worth keeping Kevin Thelwell at the club for maybe one more year at least, with the fact that he's got the experience of navigating this kind of transfer market and the way it's set up?
Well, what we've just said is that Everton are basically in a position to make decisions on their own terms when it comes to accepting or rejecting bids that come in for players. The work that the Friedkins have done over the past few months means that they can take that approach to the whole of their strategy. Whilst I think Kevin Fowler deserves credit for the way in which he's managed to kind of get Everton through these last 2 years, and particularly the early business last summer to make sure that Everton were PSR compliant, but still, as we have seen now that Moyes has come in and rejuvenated the team, still have a competitive team. He deserves a lot of credit for that. But I don't think that the situation going into the final months of this year is so complicated that people outside the club necessarily wouldn't be able to sort it. So I think that what the Friedkins have is they had the room for manoeuvre. Obviously, they're having conversations behind the team. Moyes will have had a big influence on the way things go, and we know what his historical view on director of footballs have been. So, I think Everton are moving into a position this summer where they can do essentially what they want, make decisions on their own terms. So, therefore, that historic need to kind of maybe keep Fowler in for a little bit more. Actually, I think they can move forward beyond that and go, rather than who's the person we need for now, it's who's the person we want to build our future. For whatever reason, it doesn't appear to be Kevin Fowler. We can have discussions to whether that's fair or not, whether that's right or not. That's the decision the Friedkin Group have made. And they have the room to be able to do that now. And I think really maybe this accounts kind of are a good indication of that. Is Everton are moving into a different sphere now. It's been about survival for a long time. Now it's about progress. That work has already started. All right, there might be a bit of PSR lag going into these final few months, but they have the room for that ambition. They have the room for to start building towards whatever their future vision for the club is. So why hang around? If there is someone out there that you think aligns with your way of thinking, that you think is the person that you want to take the club forward, well, now's the chance to get them in, because you can start that rebuild this summer. So why have that kind of lingering hangover from the old regime, kind of just not dragging you back, but just staying around the place for another year when you can already make that step forward?
I think they also saw there was an opportunity, and probably he did as well, for him to exit on quite good terms.
Yeah.
And I think he'll get another job, another good job somewhere quite easily, I think. But I don't think there was any real animosity towards anything. I think they were very courteous in kind of the job he'd done, done some good work. So, but some people's skill set doesn't lend itself to what ownership wants, and obviously I think they're just forward planning. And why do that in 12 months' time when they could start that now.
Just very quickly before we go, because I know we've got to shoot off, but a lot of people asking about stadium naming rights. I know we've spoke about this in the past. If Everton were to close a deal for stadium naming rights, say in the summer, how will that impact in terms of, say, transfer market?
We're looking into kind of 25, 26 now, really. I think that's probably where they're going to... Even if they had the opportunity to, I still think they kick that deal over into the next financial year, because I think they know that they'll be okay this year, and why not start the kind of the rebuild almost in terms of finances next year. I've seen some of the kind of what people think they might be able to get in the market for stadium naming rights. It won't be £20 million a year over 10 years. It just won't be. I mean, it's that people look at what you can get in the American market for stadium naming rights versus here. It's very different. So in America, you have, in any state, you've probably got 30 or 40 multinational companies, all of them kind of jostling for, and how do they stand out? How do they? There's a scarcity of sporting assets, major ones that you can attach yourself to. So, hence the reason why the value of these. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of multinational companies in the US, but in some states there's hundreds of them. So, scarcity value means the value of those is driven up. But over here, so Everton are probably going to look towards the US market themselves. So they may get some joy from some simpatico relationships, maybe that the Friedkins have with businesses in Texas, where they're based, or it might just be a curveball. But I think they will be more thoughtful around who they have. I think it will have to align. They may look at stuff which provides maybe a benefit in terms of whether it's a sponsor which can deliver kind of as well as a good revenue stream, delivers kind of connectivity around the stadium, which improves the experience, or there's a whole manner of different things you can do. I think it'll be something which delivers more value than just a paycheck or just a check at the end of it. But how soon that happens, I don't know. But they've been going at it now for a couple of years, and the noise. And I imagine, given some of the noises that have been being made, it's getting closer.
Toyota. I speak Toyota. No, is that open up a can of worms there?
Well, yeah, I mean they have relationships here. Sometimes you just have to look at what is kind of in front of your nose. It's they own Gulf States Toyota, which is one of the biggest dealerships in the US, and that's where most of their business comes from. But they'll be looking at how does that impact associated party transactions, which is still up in the air and not been properly resolved yet. So, or do they just? I think the stadium will be an attractive proposition for people because they can. It's a brand new, and also it's valuable now because it's the first naming rights deal for a new stadium, and that's where the true value lies, because that's where people's association and attachment with the brand comes. I still call the Reebok Stadium the Reebok Stadium. It's not called the Reebok Stadium; it's called Tough Sheet Stadium.
It's the Echo Arena, isn't it?
And the MEN Arena and all that sort of it's the first attachment you have with a brand and a name. And Everton have been quite cute with that, really, I think, in terms of it's just been known as Everton Stadium, or we've just referred to it as the development at Bramley Moor Dock. We haven't really attached anything to it. And I think that's been... so even when I write it, I'm like, what do I refer to it as here? Yeah. So there's no real attachment. So I think that's a valuable proposition to say this is the first one, which is why companies likely won't look at 5-year deals. It will almost be certainly kind of 10 years plus, because that's when you get the ability to really create like a lasting brand. So even when they depart after 10, 11 years, maybe they don't, you are still attached to that by the period that's gone prior. So I think there'd be good value attached to it, but it won't be some of the figures which have been bandied around.
The Royal Blue Podcast Stadium sounds good, Joe, doesn't it? Yeah. Should we have a whip round? See if
absolutely.
Yeah. I hope it's like, if it was 20 quid a year for I might be able to spin that. But.
Okay, we'll finish off. But final thoughts. Obviously, press conference this afternoon, Joe. Head of the Merseyside
Derby.
Off
there now when we finish off.
Predictions.
Or predictions for the Derby. You said no curveballs. You keep throwing these things.
That's a standard podcast question.
He actually says, "Ask Joe this question."
Speaking of Michael Balford's column on this yesterday, you don't want to. We've been in a situation so often, and we just always get our fingers burnt, don't we? You kind of sit there and you think, one of the things that I found really interesting when I was speaking to Borley was he was saying that he said he didn't do this with Merseyside Derby. He said he did quite a lot with the Old Firm Derby when he was up at Rangers. He said it can be really handy, especially if you're the underdog, when you have these games that are so close together, especially if you did well in the first one. So if you go 18 months, as sometimes the season might have you do without playing Liverpool. We know obviously Liverpool are a very, very good side. So sometimes it can take you 70 minutes to work out what that player that you're battling up against, what their weakness is, what you can maybe exploit. Sometimes you don't even find them out. Well, Everton have kind of done that fact-finding mission because they got under their skin clearly at Goodison, didn't they? Yeah. And although it took that incredible moment from Tarkowski at the end to nab an equaliser, I think Everton could easily have won that game. I don't think there could have been too many complaints that they do. I did think they were the better side for most of it. So all that is still fresh in the mind. So I sit there and I think, they've just played them. They know what their weaknesses are. I don't really think Liverpool have recovered from that derby. When you look at the emotions that were spent in the aftermath from the Liverpool side of things, kind of coloured what happened over the weeks later. And look, we know they're going to win the league, but the disappointment against PSG, the disappointment against Newcastle. On the one hand, you've got to be worried because you've got a wounded beast that's going to come out and want to make a point to prove and make sure they just wrap up the title as soon as possible. On the other hand, have you got a side there that Everton know how to get under the skin, that are going to be under pressure, that are going to have a little bit of anxiety and tension? If Everton can get through that first 20 minutes, you never know, do you? So, I build myself up and I just know that, I don't know, Zolzbala is going to just put in a free kick after 8 minutes and then it's just going to be a long night. But I'm going to go for... Everton deserved a point there last season, and they would have got that, I think, had Ibrahim Konate got the second yellow card he should have got. So I'm gonna go for a 1-1.
Okay, I went for 0-0 yesterday. You're gonna go for a prediction, or?
Yeah, I think as Joe said, I think Liverpool have looked so disjointed in recent weeks, and also they still have the likelihood is they will win the league, but also they will be in the back of their mind that Champions League's gone. Lost the Carabao Cup, and there will be some element of nerves knowing they still have to get over the line. And if a defeat against Everton, people will still be thinking, "Is this done yet?" And then, boys, Everton go into it with, they're safe.
Yeah.
Unless kind of something ridiculous happens, the likes of which we've never seen in football before. But and I think they'll be brave with it. So I think 1-1. Because I think Liverpool still have nerves. I don't think they've probably. But it depends how the international break's gone for the individuals. Some of them they may have served them well being away from that environment at Liverpool for a week or so.
Sorry to interrupt, but a lot of Liverpool players have been on international duty, like Van Dijk, extra time and penalties in his game.
Yeah,
as I say, we get dragged into this so often, and we know we get proved wrong so often, but there's an opportunity there for Everton. Like Dave says, there's no pressure on the Everton players. This is a group of players now. Most of them are playing for their futures as well. There's no relegation battle. They can go out and they can kind of just play for themselves and the team.
For a long while, they've actually had started to have look towards the rest of the season. They can play with a bit more freedom and a bit looser. And I think it's
so I do think that Moyes will be alive to that. He knows how rare a win at Anfield is for Everton. And it just feels like there is more of an opportunity here than there often is. Whether or not Everton have the ability, whether or not they'll get the luck to exploit that, obviously big open questions. But it does feel like there's a chance if Everton can approach it in the right way and say just get through that first 20 minutes and say get a bit of luck. They don't have luck at Anfield. Maybe this is the time.
Maybe it's the I look at it as thinking because it's so euphoric that moment at kind of Goodison Park against Liverpool. I wonder how often do you get two of them in a season against rivals? I don't know, but I still think 1-1 is probably I think it might be a bit of a damp squib. I don't know.
Okay, well, that is all for today's show. As always, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Drop us some 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify. I've been Ian Croll, joined by Joe Thomas and Dave Powell, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.